Then let us come to the most important aspect of India-Russia relations, defense cooperation. So this is the fundamental pillar of India-Russia cooperation. So whatever answer you are writing, defense should be the key part of your answer when writing about India-Russia relations. And the peculiarity of India-Russia defense relations is that this is more than a buyer-seller framework. We have defense cooperation with several countries like France, Israel, US, UK, etc. But the fundamental difference between these defense cooperation and India-Russia defense relations is that this is more than a buyer-seller framework. There is joint research, development and production of advanced technologies, etc. So we are buying weapons from Israel, we are buying weapons from US, we are buying weapons from France. But the real difference in those weapon purchases and India-Russia defense relations is that we are really having a defense partnership and like kind of full and technology transfer and things like that. Russia is the only country that supplies things like nuclear submarines to India. It is the only country that is ready to have technology transfer with respect to India, especially in developing sensitive weapon systems. So that is the real difference between India's defense relations with Russia and other countries. And India and Russia have jointly developed the BrahMos cruise missile, which is the fastest and the most advanced cruise missile system in the entire world itself. And they are jointly producing it. They are jointly developing it. Then the backbone of the Indian Army is a battle tank called T-90, which we purchased from Russia. So this T-90 battle tank is the backbone of the Indian Army. This is the tank. We will not be sending Arjun tanks to the main front of the battle. We will be sending the T-90s. It is the backbone of the Indian Army, and we purchased the T-90 tanks from Russia. Then the backbone of the Indian Air Force is a Russian-made aircraft called Sukhoi Su-30 Mk. So this is basically the backbone of Indian nuclear triad also. This is a legendary aircraft. This is, as of now, this is one of the most advanced air superiority fighters in the entire world, and there is a widespread belief among many of the Indian population that when we went for Rafale deal, now we have abandoned our cooperation with Russia in the case of Air Force cooperation. But the reality of the matter is Su-30 Mk and Rafale are aircraft suited for different purposes. See, Su-30 Mk is an air superiority fighter which is designed to fight other aircrafts or other fighter jets. Whereas Rafale is a multi-role combat aircraft which can fight other aircrafts as well as ground targets. See, the role of Su-30 Mk and Rafale is really different. And the backbone of the Indian Air Force is not the 36 Rafales, we have around 250 Sukhoi Su-30 Mks. And these aircrafts can even deliver nuclear weapons. It is a major part of the Indian nuclear triad. And it is the backbone of the Indian Air Force. And this is the biggest concern for the Chinese also. See, what the Chinese did was that Chinese purchased like many aircrafts like the Su-33s from Russia, and they have ordered like around 6 Su-33s. And then they reverse engineered these Su-33s and they created a Chinese copy of it called the J-15s. So oftentimes Chinese will be buying 1 or 2 aircrafts from Russia, and then they will develop their own cheap copies of these aircrafts, and then they will export these aircrafts at a lower cost also. But these cheap Chinese copies are not at all as good as the original Russian made ones. And basically this Su-30 Mk was based on a Russian aircraft called Sukhoi Su-30. And when the Indian Air Force checked these Su-30s, they recommended around 40 changes. And the resultant of those changes was one of the greatest fighter jets ever made in the world during the 90s and 2000, and that was the Sukhoi Su-30 Mks. And this is one major worry for China if it ever fights an air war with India also. Indian Air Force will be using this dangerous Su-30 Mks, and until they produce enough J-20s, the 5th generation J-20s, China is really at a disadvantage when fighting an air war with India due to the Su-30 Mks. And now India and Russia is in talks to upgrade the Su-30 Mks to the Super Sukhoi forms, again which will be dramatically boosting the capabilities of the Indian Air Force. So backbone of the Indian Army and Air Force are basically the Russian defense technologies. Then the backbone of the Indian Navy our main aircraft carrier, the INS Vikramaditya, was basically an Admiral Gorshkov class aircraft carrier purchased from Russia. So again, you can see how much the Indian armed forces is dependent on Russian defense technologies. And more than buying these defense technologies, Indian companies are having licensed production facilities of these Su-30 MKs and Arjun T-90 tanks in India. So we are not simply buying this technology from Russia. We are having licensed production facilities for Su-30 MKs and T-90 tanks in India, and that is where the defense cooperation stands. And again, developing missiles and missile defense systems is one area the Russians is really the best. Recently Russia produced an aircraft called RS-28 Sarmat, and the peculiarity of this ballistic missile is that it can completely wipe out an area with the size of France in seconds. And NATO is calling that missile as Satan 2. That is what NATO calls that missile. So again, development of missiles and missile defense systems is one area that the Russians does it best. So what China did was that China started purchasing Triumph air defense systems or S-400 air defense systems from Russia. And anyway, when the Indian defense establishment became aware of that fact, when Prime Minister Modi and President Putin had the 17th annual summit, India and Russia reached agreements to buy 5 S-400 Triumph air defense system from Russia. So again, this Triumph air defense system will be our key weapon in fighting air forces of China and Pakistan. Then again, recently there has been a lot of defense agreements between India and Russia. There was a joint venture to manufacture Kamov Ka-226T helicopters in India. Basically, these Kamov 226T helicopters, these are basically anti-submarine early warning helicopters. So again, these are being manufactured in India as part of the joint venture between India and Russia right now. And there has been a lot of annual military training exercises between India and Russia from 2003 onwards. And India-Russia annual military exercises are being called by the name Indra. And in Indra 2017 will be held in October 2017. And the peculiarity of that Indra 2017 is that this will be the first military exercise in which all the 3 services in the Indian armed force will be, and in Russian armed force will be participating. So Indian Navy, Indian Army, Indian Air Force will be participating, and their Russian counterparts will be participating also. And this is the first tri-service exercise between India and Russia. So that is the peculiarity of Indra 2017. And the key defense project between India and Russia is the FGFA, or the 5th generation fighter jet. I think we have already discussed about the FGFA in the past. So basically, by the end of the 2000s, the Americans brought out a 5th generation fighter jet called F-22. And this was really an invincible aircraft. And the US Congress even blocked the export of the F-22 to other countries. So the US understood that now there is no fighter jet that can beat the F-22. And the Chinese then, they started building something called the J-20. So finally, Russia also decided to develop a 5th generation fighter jet, and they didn't have the financial wherewithal, so they asked support from India also. So India and Russia jointly decided to develop a 5th generation fighter jet, and this was called the PAK-FA in Russia. This was initially called the PAK-FA, and right now this has been renamed to Sukhoi Su-57. So anyway, the Russians started developing something called PAK-FA. Again, the Indian Air Force suggested around 40 changes to PAK-FA, and that the Indian version of the PAK-FA was renamed as 5th generation fighter jet, or FGFA, and in India it is also being called by the term PMF, or Perspective Multi-Role Fighter. So this is a major 5th generation fighter jet project between India and Russia, and this is going to be the biggest defense agreement between India and Russia. This is going to change the face of the Indian Air Force itself. But the FGFA program is facing a lot of issues. Basically, when India and Russia reached an agreement for developing the FGFA there has been a lot of clauses in these agreements. There has been things like substantial technology transfer. There has been these sort of agreements. And now the Indian Air Force wants access to the sensitive electronic systems of the FGFA aircraft, and this will be giving them the power to access the brains of the aircraft, and the Russians are not ready to share that kind of sensitive technology with India. That has been a major issue. Then another issue was the fact that when India and Russia signed this FGFA agreement, there was a major clause in that agreement that the Russians should support India's advanced medium combat aircraft program. So this AMCA, or Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, is basically an indigenous 5th generation fighter jet program by the DRDO. So that was one major clause in the deal. Russia should support our own indigenous 5th generation fighter jet program. And India wants to be able to upgrade the FGFA in the future even without Russian help. That is why India wants this kind of high-end technology transfer from Russia when building the FGFA. And India will be contributing a lot of money to that project also. And the initial deal was basically something like this. Both India and Russia will be combined, they will be spending around $30 billion on the FGFA project. So you can see that this is that kind of a massive defense project. And Russia will be purchasing 250 of these aircrafts, and India will be purchasing 144 of them. And by 2022, this will be a done deal. Basically, this was the first version of the agreement that was being signed. But now what happened was that there has been a lot of technical failures and delays in developing the PAK-FA aircraft. And the Russians are having financial crises due to economic sanctions laid out on them by the West due to that Crimea crisis. Anyway, now Russia, what it did was that now Russians understood that the PAK-FA isn't going to kick off anytime soon. So they reduced their orders from 250 to just 18 right now, recently. So this really rattled the Indian defense establishment, and they were afraid that this entire program is going to collapse. So India threatened that we will abandon the entire FGFA program. So now the Russians have said that we will be giving substantial technology transfers and all with respect to the FGFA program. This was the dream project of our former defense minister Manohar Parrikar. We could perhaps buy a 5th generation fighter jet F-35 from the USA. But Manohar Parrikar believed that we should go for the FGFA, because if we start buying the F-35, there will not be any technology transfers. We will keep on buying F-35 for the next 50 years. That isn't what India wants. No global power can be a global power without having an indigenous defense industry. And FGFA and its resultant AMCA will be the only projects that can really make India self-sustainable in the defense sector. So that is why the FGFA, the success of the 5th generation fighter jet is really, really crucial for India. There are certain moments of history in which a country decides to be a global power, and that should start with building an indigenous defense industry. So that is why this is really, really crucial. We should stop buying more and more foreign defense technologies, and we should focus on indigenous defense industry. See, I am not completely opposing buying foreign weapons. We need a Rafale and all. For the time being, the Indian Air Force is in a really weak point. So in order to overcome these sort of crises, we need to buy some fighter jets immediately. But our future plan should always be in building indigenous fighter jets, because in the future, India is looking towards a global system where it's a superpower. And no superpower can be a superpower without an indigenous defense industry.